Hello and welcome to Walpole United WFC. Hello and welcome to Walpole United with me, John Foster, MUFC. Got an exciting show planned tonight. We've been looking forward to this for a couple of weeks. Getting Stuart back on. How you doing, Stuart?
I'm very well. We've had a couple of sleepless nights with my team up gold, so this is effectively a party and a night out for me. So, I've got a little bit of a lubricant to make sure I don't lose my voice.
It's a nice fancy glass there. I've just gone for the usual cranberry juice or something non-alcoholic today, but I'm sure I'll get something towards the end of next week. Not long to go now. What day is it? Thursday. So this time in 8 days' time, we'll be in the stadium, but we'll talk about that, I'm sure, throughout the show. Joining us tonight as well is Catherine. How are you, Catherine?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Thank you for joining us for the first time, and thank you, Stuart, for getting us both in touch. Catherine, for anybody who doesn't know you, it's your first time on the show, just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background in women's football.
So I write for 3 publications at the moment. I do write for Stuart with Since 71. I also write for Impetus Football, and I write for The Women's Game, which is the largest women's paper or online magazine in Australia. My accent might sound American. I am not. I am Canadian. I'm French Canadian, to be precise. And if anybody knows about anything about soccer in Canada, specifically women's soccer, we have a very good team. They won a little medal recently, but we don't have any setup whatsoever when it comes to senior domestic football. No professional team, no domestic. We have kind of provincial competitions where players who then go away to university in the States generally compete, but there's nothing. So that has left me to write about competitions in other countries because there's nothing here. So hopefully that'll change soon, but...
Look, we'll talk a little bit about WSL, Man United predominantly, and then other clubs. But just before we get into all that, and before we get into your thoughts on Skinner, obviously, now a little bit about NWSL. Just what are your thoughts about the NWSL over the last 12 months, obviously, with COVID and everything that's gone on there, and we've seen a few English players, a few Man United players go over to the NWSL. What are your thoughts on those?
I think from the time Skinner entered to the time he left, the NWSL has kept growing and has kept expanding it like an exponential rate for the better. Last year when COVID hit, a lot of people were really worried because if you know anything about football in North America, we've had 2 previous professional leagues, both of which haven't lasted longer than 3 years, that in the States, that is. And, the NWSL was going on 8 years. So people were wondering, will they actually get a chance to play? And they put on the NWSL Challenge Cup. They were the first professional league of any kind to get back to playing, and then a fall series. And I would say this year is probably the most competitive year we've seen in a league that's already competitive. At the moment, you've got 2 teams that are at the top that have long been probably the strongest teams in the league, and that's the Portland Thorns and the North Carolina Courage. But then when you go from 3rd place to 9th place, there's 6 points separating them right now. So it's a really, really competitive league. And with the salaries and the expansions overseas, a lot of people started worrying, like, will we lose a lot of the talent to the FAWSL, to top European teams? Because the NWSL does have a very low salary cap. About 30% of players make the minimum, which is $22,000 a year, and about 70% of players make about $30,000 or less, which in pounds is about 22,000, I think, pounds a year. It's really not a lot. So when you look at the financial advantages of going overseas, people were wondering, will that be affected? They've since added allocation money, which has allowed them to bring in a lot of talent that have, I think, really added to the league, as well as they've retained a lot of their talent. And this year has seen a lot of Americans come back. So I'd say it's a really exciting league. You never know on any night who will win. It's very direct football, though.
You can see why they came back, though.
Pardon me?
You can see why they came. Yeah, definitely. When in reality, from a financial perspective, unless you're an international or got your own private sponsorships outside, you're probably not making much more than sort of like that £28,000. So that's sort of $30,000 to $35,000. And we all know that the Americans, they back their teams with facilities. They back that. I'd probably argue that every single state university or the bigger universities provide better facilities and better support to their players than most WSL teams.
That is because they're legally required to, though. You know, universities in the States compete for football. Like American football for men is, it's I think the 5th biggest revenue sport in the world. But legally, because of Title IX, they have to treat men and women the same. They have to give the same amount of sponsorship, and they have to have the same amount of facilities, of physios, of travel. When you go from American soccer at college level to the NWSL, until really recently, it was actually a huge step down in terms of facilities. One of the really good things that's happened, especially in the last 3 years, is a number of teams there are a number of teams that got called out, like for having no facilities in some circumstances, and a number of teams have either joined the league or drastically increased how they treat their players. So the standards are really rising overseas, and I think that is one of the things that is attractive to players. That and the average attendance for games is a lot higher than you'll see anywhere in Europe for even teams like KC, Kansas City, who have won one game so far in all their franchise. So, but yeah, at the college level, it's because it's legally they are not allowed to discriminate. Men and women have to be treated the same, and that doesn't exist anywhere else.
I've spoken to a lot of players who came back after graduating, and they would say they would turn up on day one and they would get almost more gear than the stuff they actually flew over with. So they'd almost get 3 or 4 bags because they'd had so much kit given to them, to the point that they could have a different set of boots every couple of weeks. They could just go down and be like, oh yeah, that one, yeah, and that's fantastic. Like, I bet the Man United players don't get that.
They don't, but that being said, players in the NWSL don't get that. Until recently, you had college players who would rely on the boots they got in, or who entered the league, who would rely on the boots they got in college because they were making so little money and they didn't have a boot sponsor, that's what they were wearing, stuff they had gotten during their 4 or 5 years of university play.
So they were getting a size up every couple of weeks, like planning ahead, like I do with my 18-month. I bought her a football shirt recently. She currently wears 12 to 18 months, and I've just bought her a new one for this year, and it's 2 to 3. So, yeah, she's not even going to. It'll be 2 seasons time before she properly fits it. But yeah, plan ahead. So yeah, I guess
the dress will just become a shirt over time.
Exactly.
That's what we do. Exactly. With my niece.
Guys, we talk about the NWSL, and you mentioned Man United players. There's a great comment on screen with Tobin Heath. Just interested to hear your thoughts on that one, Catherine, because you're still not guaranteed to be anywhere as far as we're aware. A few rumours going around England at the moment. What are your thoughts on that one?
So just a little background. In the NWSL, there's no free agency, which means if you're a player and your rights are owned by a team, you don't have the right to go somewhere else and sign. And so this past year, while Tobin Heath and Kristen Press were at Man United, their rights were acquired by Racing Louisville, and neither of them went to that team. Legally, they have the right because they're not contracted to an NWSL team. They're contracted to the U.S. Federation, who subsidizes their players, allocates them to teams, and the exchange for that is they can pull players from the league whenever they want. Which is why the U.S. constantly practices outside FIFA windows and constantly plays outside FIFA windows, and sometimes looks more like a club team, the national team that is, than an actual national team. But in their case, they didn't show up. This past week, Kristen Press was acquired by the new expansion team, Angel City, but they gave like everything to get her acquisition. They promised a first-round draft pick next year. They gave $75,000 worth of allocation money. So we were talking about like minimum salaries. Every team in the NWSL has a salary cap, but they can spend above that by taking allocation money and giving it to players who fall under certain minimum requirements. Either they've been in the league for a while, they have been in the best of the league's team, or they are international players. So they gave some of that allocation money away. And also this year is a double expansion draft. So when new teams enter the league in the NWSL, to make their players, all the other NWSL teams are told you're allowed to protect this many players in your roster, those that can't be touched. And then the ones that aren't touched, that's where players will be drafted from all the teams to make this new team. This year is a really important year because you have Angel City and San Diego entering. So one of the things that Angel City gave Racing is they said, okay, if you give us Kristen Press until on top of the first round draft pick and the $75,000, we're also not going to draft from your team. Realistically, Tobin Heath, I would say, is about as important an asset as Kristen Press was. She's 1 year older, but I would say she is equivalent in her capacity to produce, in her capacity to be offensive, and her marketing capacity. She's about as. So I don't know what Angel City could give that would be equivalent because they only have Kristen Press. They've already said that she's going to become the most expensive player ever in the NWSL in terms of what they're going to pay her, which means they're spending a lot of their allocation money on her, and they've already given some away. So I don't know if they trade more allocation money away to get Tobin Heath, they probably couldn't go get an international player elsewhere. And they're both American players, which means they can be, if they go to like tournaments, which coincide with the season because they're during the summer, they could lose their two marquee players at the same time. They don't have, like, they could trade draft picks away, but like, would it be smart for them to trade their future for two players who are advancing their mid-30s? So the big rumor was that she was going to go to Angel City, and I don't know what they could give Racing to be able to acquire her. Jeff Kazouf from The Equalizer tweeted out just yesterday that she is looking to go abroad, Tobin Heath, that is. She wants to go back to Europe, but she's looking for a team where she has a chance of I would argue, probably winning the Champions League or getting Champions League play. So our chances of coming back to Man United, I would say, are slim to none with this recent news that was put out. And I don't...
My money's on...
Sorry.
I was going to say, my money's on Barcelona.
Yeah. But then again, what I'm wondering is, can they afford her? I mean, I know she loves the club because she's tweeted about them for nearly 10 years, but with their financial situation, can they afford her?
I would probably say yes, because, well, no, they can't effectively, but in reality, what they would need to pay Tobin Heath is nothing compared to the men's players. They could probably sign her on a little bit of what, when you think about all the men's players and how much money's involved, yeah, they could easily do it.
Yeah. I mean, it'll be interesting because she's a player who has a lot of aspiration, and one of the things she doesn't have is that Champions League trophy. So I think that's where you'll see her. Like, I don't know if it'll be Barcelona, but you'll definitely see her at a contender, someone that can.
Yeah, her marketing value is probably, like, we know these players aren't on gargantuan wages like the men's team, so the marketing team can probably make their money back. I hate talking about men's football and women's football world, but I think I remember they were talking about how big Paul Pogba's transfer fee to Man United was, but they also predicted he was worth £30 million a year in merchandise and the money he brings into the club. So actually, in reality, Man United make money. You forget about the transfer, the wages. They make money on everything else. So the transfer fee is paid off, and they make a profit on that.
I would argue it's why nobody fought Lionel Messi going to PSG, because Ligue 1 is in really dire financial situations, and him going to that league because of the whole TV debacle they had last year will. I don't know. I don't want to say it'll save the league, but it will definitely bring in a huge financial boost that will stabilize it in a way that even a month ago, when you were reading about them, you were going, oof.
It'll be like when Man United were in the FA Women's Championship and attendances spiked whenever Man United came to town.
Yeah.
That's one for Natalie.
Yeah.
Stuart, there's a comment from our friend Natalie in the comments. Hope you're well, Nat. And hello to James in the comments as well. James has done our intro. I've got his Twitter handle across the bottom of the screen, so thank you, James, for that as well. Natalie said Arsenal if he comes back to England.
Natalie knows nothing about football. No, I'm only kidding. Only because she's not here. I don't know. Arsenal. Well, no, not Arsenal.
How would you feel last year? Because I know you got obviously a soft spot for United. If you see it come back and it's not to United, would you be a bit like me? Would rather see a play at Barcelona or PSG or anywhere else apart from a WSL team, or would you like to see him come back to WSL just to watch her?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Just look at the abuse that Alex Greenwood got. Like, if Tobin Heath went to Manchester City, Chelsea, or Arsenal, and she doesn't get the same treatment that Alex Greenwood got, then United fans are hypocrites. Ultimately, like I know that it would be hypocritical. I think it would be everyone would have a right to be a little bit disappointed, and I think that she's done with WSL to a degree. Chelsea, I can't see her going to Chelsea, so therefore, her options for me in England are going to be Manchester City or abroad.
Let's hope it's abroad then, because I can't see her.
Yeah, same. It would be disappointing.
You can't see her going to Arsenal.
No.
I mean, if they win in the next 2 games, then they're going to be in the group stage. That's, she's a free agent. That's an enticing proposal.
Yeah, but I don't know. Maybe I'm being cynical, but I see her wanting to win a trophy. So then she's thinking, right, well, if I go to PSG or Lyon, then I'm in the running for winning a league trophy. If I go to Bayern Munich, I'm in the running for winning a league trophy. If I go to Barcelona, Atletico, then I'm in the running for winning a league trophy. So I think she's going to want more from. She's going to want to buy one get one free almost. So she's going to go to a club that's definitely going to be winning the league, and Arsenal ain't going to be winning the league.
I don't see PSG winning the league. They lost a lot of talent over the summer. It's a club she's already been at, and maybe she might, but I don't see her being. I don't want to say loyal, but I don't see it being enough of a draw with all the talent that they lost for her to come back, to go back.
It's set up for Spain then.
Maybe.
I think Vicky's made a good point.
Barcelona's a lovely place.
It is.
I think Vicky's made a good point. Even if she does join Arsenal, if she actually wants Champions League ambition, the likeliness of Arsenal actually winning that Champions League is probably still quite slim, isn't it? So, yeah, she could join just to get Champions League football. And obviously she will actually add to that team a lot, but that's still quite a big...
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Like, if they are actually pushing to try to get she would be a player to target because she could add a lot to that team. Whereas I would say going to Arsenal, she definitely has the talent, but that's not going to Barcelona. She definitely has the talent, but she wouldn't have the same impact that's all I meant, than she would going to Arsenal.
Cool. I want to start touching on a few things that we've kind of advertised. So I just want to talk a little bit about the growth of the women's football over the last 3 years since United have come in. Not necessarily anything because of United, but potentially it is. We spoke before we actually went live about the championship getting a lot stronger. But how about how the WSL has actually moved forward as well? Stuart, do you want to kind of touch on what your experiences is like in the last 3 years, how much you think it's actually moved forward? And then that kind of links into a little bit about going forward from there. James's comment about how Sky will affect the women's game.
The WSL has moved forward. There's no denying that. For me, I don't know how far forward it's gone, in a sense of you've still got maybe 4. So next season with Everton doing well, you've probably got 4 teams at most that have any chance of making 5 teams that have a chance of making the top 4.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got 2 or 3 sides that are fighting for sort of mid-table. Obscurity is a bit harsh, but effectively it is a little bit. And then you've still got 3 or 4 teams that potentially you're just getting hammerings in their own. What I'm trying to say is the WSL is 3 mini leagues. So while it's progressed, it's still 3 mini leagues. So how much has it progressed? I don't know. For me, the strength of... Go on, Catherine.
I think you have to be fair about giving it the appropriate time to grow. Like, it's only been since 2018, 2019 that it's actually been full time. Again, I know I jump a lot to the NWSL, but the NWSL resembled very much what you described at the beginning. There were teams with financial clout and who had really drafted well in their first years who kind of dominated, and you had teams at the bottom who stood no chance. That you knew they would, you knew that the teams coming in might play their second team against them, and it took a good 5-6 years before you like it was always a very competitive league, but before you really started seeing a lot more equalization. Obviously, they don't have the same financial clout coming from the men's side in most of their situations, because there's a couple of independent clubs, a couple of clubs that aren't with MLS teams, they're with USL teams, and then there's one club that's owned by Lyon and overseas. So they don't necessarily have the same financial clout, but like the growth took a while, as did the raising of the standards. And this is 3 years in, and they already have a television broadcast deal. I would say they are kind of on track towards becoming something that's a lot more equalized, and where they themselves as clubs have learned how to acquire talent, where to acquire talent, what they need to keep their talent, and how they as a club want to grow. Because we may look at a club, even look at United, and say, oh, it's got a storied history. It has a storied history on the men's side, but repeating that on the women's side will need its own evolution, and that can take years to actually develop. So I get what you're saying. It is 3 mini leagues, and I agree with you. And I think part of that is because of the financial clout that they might have from the men's side. But at the same time, I think we have to be generous with all the teams that are involved and actually give them the time to adapt to the realities of what women's football is, women's professional football.
Definitely, you're absolutely bang on, and that's why I think we can only really judge it in about 5 years' time. I think in 5 years' time, I think the landscape of women's football will have drastically changed to what we have now. For me, I think the Football Association have done a fantastic job creating the top of the pyramid, and I think the next 3 or 4 years, the true judgment on the success of how they've managed it would be that when they bring up the Championship and the National League Tier 3. The Championship is still officially non-professional, but so many of the clubs are not far off professional that if this time next year they've become professional, I wouldn't be surprised whatsoever. And that'd be a fantastic move for women's football, because once they become professional, they're playing football every day, they're having the facilities, they're getting the sponsorship. So that's the point that they can potentially get promoted to the Super League, but have a genuine impact on it when they do get promoted. At the very moment, we all know that if Bristol, Liverpool, Sheffield United, Durham, Charlton, for exactly, if they got promoted, they would be the weakest team in the league, and they would probably do well to get 7 or 8 points over the course of the whole season. Give it 2 years' time when they're professionalised, they've maybe brought up some of the best players in the lower leagues to bring them up, to bring that talent up. You're going to get exactly that. Hopefully, we can have an expanded Super League as well. So if you've got these 3 mini leagues, you bring more teams into there. There are more winnable games. If there's more winnable games, you attract more talent. Yeah, I think the most exciting time for women's football will be 3-4 years' time. So that continual growth is fantastic. And as people have commented, have touched on, Sky will bring that. Sky, I'm not big on Sky and the sensationalist style that they report football news, but it's been touched on that they know how to sell a product, and they do sell a product. And the best thing that they can do is legitimize women's football as a genuinely big sport. I was talking to a friend of mine recently, and the thing that I kind of said to him was that it's very rare that you get a 0-0. So forget if you want to compare it to the standard of football, if Real Madrid played Chelsea or Man City in men's team, it's going to be different. But from an entertainment perspective, it beats men's football every time, and I think that's true going down the leagues. I would love everyone here, and I know, John, we spoke earlier that you were going to a championship game next week. Everyone here should go see the local team. If you go to your local team and you see a 0-0 draw, I will send you a T-shirt or send you a beer in the post or something, because it just doesn't happen. It's so rare. So the entertainment value and the value for money for your match ticket is brilliant.
Can I just jump in there, Chris? There's a fantastic time to mention what I'm going to say, and I was going to mention it at the start of the show, but I got carried away and got straight into it. There's a very well-known football YouTuber on YouTube, and I woke up this morning seeing a tweet from his account, and I'm not going to name drop him, but he's quite easily visible on Twitter and YouTube, and he has recently invested and sponsored his local women's team. Now, this person never speaks about women's football on his show. He's never really shown an interest in public, but he's still gone and invested whatever amount of money is relevant in his local team. I'm not too sure what team it's in. I will find out, but he's not in the top 3 or 4, I don't believe. And he's done that for a couple of reasons. He's mentioned, obviously, how that team suffered during COVID, and also because he's got daughters as well who obviously want to play football or who like football. And he's thinking of those and other children as well who wants to get into the game. So you can find out who it is, absolutely. And, just kudos to him, because there's no need for him to do that, but he's gone and done that. And I just think that's such a great thing. And I know if I had a bit of extra money and if I could invest in something, that's something that I would do as well. So I just wanted to mention that, because that is actually something nice that's probably not going to be mentioned too much.
So so you go first, Catherine, go on.
I do hope we get to a time where you don't have to have a daughter to invest, because often you do hear, I don't know if it's especially when men invest in things that have women in them, they feel this need to explain why they would do that. But I think one of the greatest things that you're seeing right now, and you see it a lot here in North America, is ownership groups for women's teams, or women's teams getting like a boost from a varied group of people, including a lot of people, like you said, who might have a huge, like Angel City is almost half of them are A-list. Naomi Osaka invested in North Carolina. You're seeing a lot of big people invest in the sport. And what I would say is, if you're an ordinary person, you don't have to be famous to invest in women's football. But the great thing about doing it, whether it be actually investing or sponsoring a player, is the return on your investment that you'll get is far greater than anything you'll get on the men's side. It doesn't take a lot to support women at this day and age where we are in the evolution, but the support you can give can make a difference. You sponsor a player, it can make a difference between her being actually able to play or having to worry about getting on the field. And that return, like you said, it will be entertaining, but that return is huge. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we've seen, especially in the last couple of years, is even 5 years ago, you wouldn't have seen the names that you're seeing now investing in North American women's sports, or arguably in sport overseas. Now is the time to invest, and you will get a huge return on it, be it either how you feel or an actual monetary return, because it's the biggest area of growth in sports. Yeah,
you've hit the nail on the head. It makes a huge difference. So just to contextualize it for UK football, many a female footballer can travel 1 to 2 hours, maybe 3 hours to participate in football. So that means that you can have a player that's got a 4 or 5 hour round trip just to train 3 times a week and then play football at the weekend. And I'll give you an example of a player that we sponsor since '71, Chirelle Cassell. She's based in Portsmouth on the south coast. Last year, she spent 2 years at Crystal Palace, so a well-recognised club. And she was looking at an hour and a half drive up to London just to train. So she's 3 times a week. She's not getting back home till 11:30 midnight. Waking up in the morning, doing her day job. To sponsor her makes a massive difference, because it means that she doesn't have to pay subs for a year. She doesn't have to pay anything for a kit, that sort of thing. And I think it makes a massive, massive difference. And obviously, so we sponsor Chirelle now. She's back in Portsmouth, so she's in a local club. So travel's out of the equation. But I went to watch the first Portsmouth game of the season, where she is currently, and she scored 4 goals. It's brilliant. And I did nothing to make her score those 4 goals. But the sense of pride that I had when she scored 4 goals was brilliant. And to see her after the match, it's brilliant. Like, we talk about financial investing in these clubs. And yeah, that makes a difference. But when you, as a fan, sponsor a player, you financially invest in it, but you emotionally invest in it as well. Not just that, you invest in the player. Portsmouth lost yesterday. Terrell scored 2 goals. I was gutted. I've always prided myself on, because since 71 we cover the whole sphere of women's football. I don't have a team. I follow so many teams, and I've got affection for so many teams. But I was gutted because we'd sponsored her. She'd done so well. She scored 2 goals. Or like, she didn't deserve to be in the losing team. Oh, damn it. And you get so much out of it. And if anyone here is kind of thinking, oh, I could probably do that. You've got clubs at differing levels of the women's football tier. Some of them, it's £50 just to cover their kit. Some of them it's 100, some of it's 200, some it's 250, some it might be 250, 300, but they'll accept less because they're open to it, to be honest. Do it. It makes a massive difference. And do you know what? If you only get to go and see 6 or 7 games a season, it's well worth it. A lot of fans of lower tier clubs, they pay £5 to £10 to go and see that club. Excuse me. So if you go and see 10 games over a season, so you could be looking at £50 to £100 in ticket sales. Well, if you spend an extra £50, then actually you probably get a free season ticket within your sponsorship, so that you pay £50 extra. But some of the clubs will say, well, we'll give you a match shirt at the end of the season. Because we're the sponsor of Tyrrell, there's Portsmouth Football Club have arranged there's going to be a sponsors evening midway through the season, so we'll get to do like a bit of a Christmas Christmas bash for the players. And at the end of the season, we'll be going to the end of season the awards. So what they give you back is fantastic, and I can't praise it enough. And yeah, go and do it. We've actually got a campaign coming out very soon on Since 71, just to give it a plug, like a thank you campaign, where we're going to be putting out details of players that work within the public sector. So we're talking teachers, police officers, firefighters, nurses, doctors. These are all people that play football in their spare time, but their day job has been massively hit with COVID. And what I'd like to see is that not one of these public sector workers have to pay subs over the course of the season. I'd love them all to be sponsored. So hopefully mid to late September, that's going to be launching. We're going to be talking about stories of players and how it's affected them personally, how they've had to change the way they worked. And if we can get them all sponsored, because if you've got that little bit of money, it makes a massive difference. And as I say, a lot of clubs, if they advertise they want £300 sponsorship, they might take less. And if you've got 2 people that wanted to share the sponsorship, then fantastic. So I could probably go on about this for the rest of the hour. But
can I add in?
Yeah,
one of the things that did attract me to writing for your blog was because you sponsor players. The idea that what I'm putting in is actually going towards women being able to play. And I 100% agree with you. Like your blog, Since 71, as well as Impetus, both those entities sponsor a lot of players. And I'm across the ocean, and I take pride when I see a tweet. I wake up and I see tweets that somebody scored. The great thing about being able to sponsor is you, in a way, kind of get partial ownership, but you can make such a difference to a player who suddenly has this burden of what might be the financial clout, or has somebody literally backing them, to play or to follow their pathway. And I take pride in the fact that I'm able to be part of entities that help that. It makes
me. And a lot of the players I speak to, they cannot quantify the boost they get from when someone sponsors them, and shows faith in them. And we can all appreciate that. If someone then said, Stu, we're going to cover your petrol, go to work every day, your day job, I'm going to be like, that's amazing. We'd all do the same.
It's such an inspirational conversation. I think we need to maybe do a separate show on this. So now it's actually, if I could listen to it all night, but I do want to kind of get on to Mark Skinner next as well. But Stuart, write that down, because I think we need to talk about that with another couple of people on the show as well. So I think that'll be fantastic to do, definitely.
Probably should talk about Man United a little bit, yeah.
We'll throw Mark Skinner in there now, because I want to hear Catherine's thoughts, obviously, from the NWSL days. But just from where I'm kind of standing now, or sitting, When he was first announced as our new manager, obviously immediately I took to him because he's a manager, and I think nearly every person who comes on Orphan United as a fan would back the manager. That's kind of the way that we are. But I think it was very much 50-50 when it comes to how successful we thought that he may be when joining the club. Obviously, what he does at Birmingham and in the NWSL has got no major bearing on what he's going to do at Man United. But obviously, as fans, we kind of do our research. And I was kind of on the fence because you've got some fans saying, oh, he hasn't done very well in the last couple of years. And then you've got fans saying, but he's done great at Birmingham. And now Catherine's going to give her point, who's kind of like, not contradicting, but adding to that. So, Catherine, do you want to kind of...
Well, I think there's no denying that he was successful at Birmingham with the resources that he had. You know, granted, he did have a number of good players, but he finished fourth, I believe. And what came out of a lot of those players is they really did enjoy working for him. His time at the Orlando Pride is, on paper, does not look successful. However, I would say that that lack of success in his journey was affected by so many things that were completely out of his control. Like his 2.5-year tenure, like I was saying earlier, is probably a master's in crisis management, because the things that he had to deal with time and time again are probably unlike most managers would ever have to deal with in kind of their career. Like, just to give you an example, his first year that he showed up at the Pride was in a Women's World Cup year. And because he had so many players on his team that were U.S. Federation players, again, he doesn't own their contracts. So if U.S. Soccer says, we want to take you out of the team to play a non-FIFA, he has no control over that. U.S. Soccer can even dictate to teams how many minutes players can play for their clubs. They have that much control. So if they told him you can play Alex Morgan for 20 minutes today, that's all he's allowed to do. And his first year, just to give you I have the numbers right here, he lost 9 players for the World Cup. Some of those players were gone for half the season. 9 players, most of them his starters, and some of them the best players in the world. And out of those 9 players, 2 never came back because they got injured. He also lost 2 other players due to injuries. Well, injuries. Sydney Leroux was pregnant that year, and she didn't come back until the end of the season. And Toni Presley, who was part of his back line, and also served as midfield, she got breast cancer and missed a huge part of the season because of her treatment. So he had a period of time where nearly a third of his squad were players on short-term contracts. And I'm talking they could be there for 2 to 4 weeks, that were replacing national team players, that were replacing injured players. So there was a lot of turnover, and it got to the point where there wasn't a single week where the starting lineup could possibly look the same. He came in and there was a little mini documentary done, and he was talking about how he wanted to change, because the NWSL is a very transitional and very athletic and very direct style of play. And he wanted to change it to a more position-based tactical style of play. And he had this whole system that every single week they would build on what they had done the week before. And the idea was that they would be able to alter and change for every opponent. Something that he's reiterated in his philosophy when he did his interviews arriving at Manchester United. Arguably, he wasn't able to do that his first year because he kept having these very changing rosters. Like he was without all his national team players in the preseason because they were away. They then left for April for some, for some friendlies, and then all his U.S. women's national team players were gone beginning of May, and some didn't return until mid-August, and then they left again for 2 other windows. I don't know how you're able to incorporate players who are kind of in that revolving door. That being said, overall, he took a team that had a lot of talent and was completely underperforming and found a brand new way to underperform. That is how I would describe his first season. And it wasn't a great team to watch. When you saw the Pride go up or go down a goal or 2, generally you would think, no, there's no way they're coming back from this. Like, that year was not a good year for that team. Then you go into last year. We talked earlier, they had the Challenge Cup. 6 days before the Challenge Cup, the Pride, about half their squad tested positive for COVID. So they're the only team that didn't participate. So the only games he had last year were 4 fall series games. However, because they didn't know what was going to happen at the end of the season, he let 12 of his players go to Europe on loan. So he was, again, without all the big names apart from Marta. So last year he had 2 draws and, again, 2 losses. You know, in the first year, he only had 4 wins, and there wasn't a single win that was greater than a 1 goal difference. So, up until this year, not on paper, not very good. But I would also say the extenuating circumstances that he faced were really not beneficial to developing any type of positive momentum of any sort. And then this year, they really started well. Until the last month that he was there, where he, again, lost a huge amount of players. They were the second most losses in all the NWSL for the amount of players that went to the Olympics. They had a really, really good start. And you could start seeing the ideas that he had been talking coming into effect. And it was a team that was completely different than the one we saw 2 years before. Like 2 years before, like I said, they went 1-0 down. Forget about it. You didn't think they were going to be able to come back. There were times where you would look at the midfield, and it was supposed to be a style based around understanding space, and that's all you would see. You were wondering how they were organized. This year, you really started to see those things coming into effect. So yeah, and then obviously he signed in United. From a player perspective, you did get a couple of odd comments coming out of his players. I do think that kind of the drawn out rumors of the fact that he might come back affected the end of his tenure through the eyes of his players. That is, like Cindy LaRue, who is known to non-mince her words. When she had her first game underneath the new interim head coach, she described it as a breath of fresh air to work underneath somebody who was invested in being there. So I wouldn't necessarily put that as a positive review. But again, like the thing with Skinner at the Pride is it's really difficult to evaluate how he did and how his ideas were put into place because of everything that happened. And I would also say, like, he's not the first manager to come from overseas and say, we're going to play more positions, like possession style and more tactical, and it not working out. I think it's a good idea to go, like a good way to go, especially for the NWSL, because they have such a hard schedule. And like in Orlando, you're playing in like 35 degrees with humidex nearly every single one of your matches. Having a style where you run less and where you know that you can build and score would be beneficial for the whole season. Because when you get to the end of the season, Southern teams tend to generally be a lot more tired than the ones who are in nicer climates. But yeah, Farid Ben Sidi came in and had the kind of the same type of thing that happened with the OL Reign. He came in and he said, I'm going to do a position-based tactical style. And he had, like Skinner, a lot of talent in his squad. And he ended up resigning within a year of being in place because his team became as unreliable, I would say, as Skinner's first season. So anyway, that's my evaluation. It's really difficult to know if his time was successful or to judge it as not being a success, because I think you have to be fair about all the stuff that happened and all the turnover, the constant in and out of players that he had.
So I guess it was unfinished. It's like handing in your exam coursework half finished.
Oh, I think it's more like being given an exam and then constantly having the rules of how you're taking the examination change on you, and then having the exam taken away, and the exam, like, just when you look at all the turnover, just the pride that they had, it's a little, I can't think of a team in recent years that has had more like turnover coming in and out of the starting lineup than they did, because he got hit time and time again with different things.
So I guess he's almost starting afresh at United, where I think, man, it's really important that United fans give in at least a season. With all the setbacks that have happened over the last 6 to 8 months. United have been set back. Ultimately, they're starting again. It's almost on par. I don't know if you would agree, John, that they're almost like they were when they were promoted. It's like, right, we're now starting from scratch. Casey's departure has set the team back effectively a year and a half. So I think everyone needs to then look and say, right, United, we're looking at 5th place and 4th place, really. They're jostling with Everton and maybe Arsenal for that top 3. But when they look at it, Mark Skinner's rebuilding his side, and I guess this time next year we're going to be talking about his team when it comes to players and what they can really achieve and making the judgments. So effectively, I personally consider he's got a little bit of a free pass next year. If he's playing good football, it's entertaining, fans enjoy it, and he's not dropping silly points and dropping into that second league within WSL that I laugh about, then he's having a good season for me.
Yeah, I just want to thank Catherine on some of them points that she's made at the beginning of her speech there regarding some of the players. No, it's fine. It's really good. It was so good that I actually want to clip it and put it on Twitter because you gave some good information there about how difficult it was for Skinner in that first season. And I think a lot of people aren't aware of that. They just look at the standard facts and figures on Twitter and Wikipedia about like how many games he's lost, but they don't actually know the reasons potentially why he's lost those games. And I think when you start mentioning all those players that he didn't have available to him and things like that, I definitely think that's worth highlighting. And Stuart, regarding about where United are now, I do think it's starting afresh. I think not just because a new manager's come in, but I think from January time, we was on that downhill spiral. Anyone who watches this show kind of saw our emotions kind of go from up here right the way down here because we were not just because we were losing games, but we're happy with how our players were treated behind the scenes and what we think our manager was treated as well. So it is a clean slate. 7 players leaving, 5 players coming in. There's a lot of change at the club. So yeah, I agree. Now he's come in. He's got his own philosophy, much like what Catherine said about his style of play as well. His style of like player management as well. I think that's going very well at the moment. It looks like that he's heavily invested in speaking to his players and getting the most out of his players by talking to them and knowing what inspires them. And this is what excites me the most. Every manager should do it anyway. It doesn't matter if you're a manager of a football team or a manager of something else. You need to speak to your team just to kind of see what does inspire them. And from what I've seen of Mark Skinner so far in his interviews and what he's probably done in Scotland over that 1 week as well, really does inspire me. Do you want to just finish up on that, Catherine? Sorry.
No, I was going to say, for me, I've seen him for the last 2 years, and it's really difficult to give, like I said, an accurate evaluation because he had so much happen. It's also, I think, difficult to evaluate how his relationships were with players because of all this turnover that he had and all the turbulence associated with COVID. But he did bring a number of players over that when they were recruited, specifically Jade Moore, I think Claire Emsley did talked really positively about coming and knowing his reputation. Same with Jodie Taylor as some of the reasons that they were originally attracted to go over. So he does have positive man management, and I think his style is a lot better suited to the FAWSL that is athletic like the NWSL, but a lot more tactical and a lot more patient in their buildup. They're not. This idea of growing a system and of learning to change every week for the opponent that you have and being able to face any opponent. Especially the way that the FAWSL goes, you don't really have midweek games and you're able to kind of build upon it. I think he'll be a lot better suited at United than he was overseas at implementing his ideas and being able to kind of grow that positive player rapport.
Okay, so I'll
can I say one more thing? I do think that they did give him a real disservice at waiting so long to replace. And they're not the only club who did it. Joe Montemurro left Arsenal. It was announced in March, and that he wasn't replaced until midway, almost a month and a half into the signing season. I think in both those situations, when you don't know who the manager will be, it's a lot harder to attract players. And I would argue that I think it's easy to argue that had he been there, or had they signed a manager earlier, they probably could have attracted more talent to come to kind of offset some of the talent that they've lost. In that sense, I think he might have, if he had been in their plans from the beginning, it might have been a disservice to wait that long, but we don't know.
I think it's what frustrates the fans as well, because we wanted a similar thing. Now looking back, were some of those deals done before the summer, before the transfer window even started anyway? Was there ever any chance of Mark Skinner getting any signings this summer, or will we have to wait until January? Loads of questions. Obviously, the transfer window's still open, so maybe we can get one or two players in. Everyone's screaming out for another forward and another striker. Yeah. But I want to kind of move the conversation on to some of the players who we've brought in. So Stuart, I'll start off with yourself, and we've got Vicky in the comments already talking about Mannion, who's obviously come in, Hannah Blundell, Bagley, Martha Thomas, Bo Risa. What are your feelings on these players? Because I think that they are generally strengthened our squad. If we did add some strikers, then I think that we're in a very good position. But I do think that the strikers who we have brought in are going to be very good for us.
Yeah, I think Man United have lost class individuals in Lauren James, Kristen Press, and Tobin Heath. But you look at the players they've brought in, you could argue they've strengthened from a team perspective. Yeah. And we all know that, Man City have been bringing in sort of stellar names. And you think, wow, Hayley Raso, that's awesome. But then that's not to say that they're going to be having a massive impact and winning games. And I also think that, especially from a WSL perspective, you can hoard fantastic talent. I think Chelsea's squad is good from a European perspective, not from a WSL perspective. They don't need a squad that big. So I've kind of been quite vocal on my support of Martha Thomas. I think a fit Martha Thomas is worth 10 to 15 to 20 goals a season if you give her the right service. Mm-hmm. I think Barista seems like she's could have a potentially a good impact, especially if United are playing a midfield three. Aoife Mannion is solid at the back. That's a like for like with Amy Turner. Some people might argue that Aoife Mannion's a better player. If Sophie Bagley can make Mary Earps raise her game, or she can raise her own game to justify that role in there, then fantastic. Hannah Blundell has come from Emma Hayes' squad, so therefore she's going to have a little bit of class about her. We all know that she's got a work ethic. So actually, while she might not sell thousands of shirts, she could be a very good addition to that United defence. And I think the biggest worry I have for United is an injury crisis. An injury crisis turns United into a fourth-place side and potentially a seventh-place side. But when the squad is there, that's good. It's strong. Kirsty Hansen, Leah Galton, Hayley Ladd. There's a very good. There's a starting 11 there that, if fully fit, can compete with anyone else in the WSL. So, and I think we all agree that I think United are about 2 signings short. Mm-hmm. Yes, we all want forwards. We want a stellar forward. We want Tobin Heath re-signing. We want Beth England coming in. But actually, I think it's just more of from a WSL perspective, it's a squad depth I'd like to see. Bringing in a couple of players that, if Blundell got injured, you could bring in another right back that could do a job. So I think ideally United need 3 new signings, 1 defender, 1 midfielder, 1 striker, just to add depth. And in an ideal world, every United fan wants a Galactico stellar signing in that comes in as first choice in each of those positions. Not for me as such. I want someone else that can come in and actually just beef up the squad. Again, because it's a rebuilding process that can maintain that level. So you've got Martha Thomas and then Alicia Russo. For me, there are 2 very good strikers. If you could add Beth England to that, and I don't believe that Beth England, I don't know anything that she's going to be coming to United, but someone of that calibre, you think, that's three tasty players. So therefore, if you can add another defender and a midfielder into the mix for that, then that strength in depth means that it could be really positive for United. So I think so far, if I was going to rate the close season, B-.
I think
as a bit of an outsider, not a United fan, just a general, non-biased kind of person.
I 100% agree with Stuart. It was a little bit disconcerting to see so much talent leaving at the beginning. I would say that the priority for signing would probably be another forward for the amount of offensive talent that has left. But since I think everybody's in agreement, this is a rebuilding year. They don't have to worry about Europe, so they're going to have some time to kind of develop and become who they can be. I think maybe getting another midfielder that could increase the depth and a midfielder that you could develop for the future that could become a true United player in the long run. Instead of going for a flashy signing, same thing with a forward, would be in the interest of the team over a big name. One of the things that's been really positive about the preseason, I would say, is when you look at who scored goals, you're not overly dependent on one person. It's really come through the midfield and the forwards. That I would say is very good, that you're not having to worry, and the way that they've been scored hasn't always been the same way. So I'd say maybe compared to the beginning of this summer, a lot less worried than a fair weather fan could be. But I agree with Stuart. I would definitely add at least another midfielder and another forward to replace what's gone out the door. Because if injuries do strike, that could be a problem, especially considering the season. Yeah. I mean,
yeah, I thoroughly agree with you both, and I'm sure we'll discuss this from now till probably to the end of the season, actually, about squad depth, because if we do get these injuries, we are aware that we will be short, but hopefully that's not going to be the case. It can't be any worse than last year. I know we wasn't the only team to suffer injuries. I know Arsenal had it tough as well, but surely last season hopefully was a one-off, because that was really excessive, hopefully anyway. Catherine, I know that you know a lot about other WSL clubs as well, not just United. Just what are your thoughts about the top three teams, Chelsea, City and Arsenal, kind of like their summers and how they're going into it? And also, I've got a question going across the bottom of the screen about who do you think is going to have the better season, Bunny Shaw, LJ and Nikita Paris, three players who have changed teams this season. Just kind of what your thoughts on the top three and those strikers who have moved around?
I found Lauren James's move a little bit odd because, like we said, Chelsea has a really, really big squad. And when you look at Beth England didn't have a bad year last year for Chelsea. She just didn't see as much time. And so to kind of go to a team where you have so much competition, it could be good, but is she actually going to play as much as she could have had she stayed another season at United? So I wouldn't necessarily put her in the running of somebody that might break through. Again, it depends if she's used or not, but I think there's so much competition at Chelsea. I see her as being more one of those players that Emma Hayes takes on and slowly develops. An example, like a good Canadian example, is Jess Fleming. Like, from our perspective, it is a little bit annoying to see her on the bench so much, but at the same time, you know, Emma Hayes does seem to be very good at developing these young players. I think Nikita Paris is going to do really well at Arsenal. She's the type of player that they needed, because and I think she's coming back to the league. I do wonder where else she could have gone, where she would have gotten as much opportunity as she will get in the Arsenal squad. Bunny Shaw, I don't know as much, but you know, I think I saw her. She competed in the World Cup last year, right?
Yeah, I think. Yeah.
So I saw her. So
she's highly thought of, but obviously she hasn't played in the league maybe to this standard. But she's definitely been banging in the goals in her previous clubs. So hopefully a forward move for her. Catherine, we have come towards the end of the show, and I need to get you on again because I know you've got so much more knowledge to give, and 1 hour just literally flies by. And Stuart, thank you very much for coming on. I've got 2 more shows planned already, just chatting to you guys. I need to get you back on ASAP. Catherine, if anybody wants to find you on Twitter, social media, or your articles or anything else, how can people go about doing that?
I actually have 2 Twitter tags. It's for reasons I won't explain, but my personal journal, like journalism one, is at Footy Paquette. Paquette spelled the way that I spelled down there, and also at Her Beautiful Game, which I do game coverage on that one a lot more. Especially, I tend to do game coverage of all the NWSL games. So, and I'd like to do the FAWSL as well. So, yeah, you can find me there.
Thank you.
And on the Stuart's blog.
Which is just there. Yeah, anything for myself there, Stuart?
No, just thank you for having me on. You're doing a fantastic job. And I'd just like to take 10 seconds just to say that from someone that's been on guesting for probably about a year or so now, you've really flourished as a presenter. You are doing fantastically well. And let's all take a moment to appreciate Jon by giving this video a like and a share.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me on, I should also say.
No, thank you, and thanks, Stuart, for organising you coming on. So definitely get you back on as soon as we can. And thank you very much for that, Stuart. We have nearly come to 1 year now. September the 18th, I believe, with our very first show. So we're only a couple of 3 weeks away from that. So maybe we can do something special for that 1 year anniversary. Thank you to everybody in the comments. Thank you, Stuart and Catherine. And we shall see you again tomorrow night for the Friday Night Fan Forum. Thank you, guys.